You already know the guy. He walks into a room and nobody has to tell you he's comfortable in his own skin. He's not louder than everyone else. He's not performing. He just isn't waiting for anyone's verdict on him before he decides how to feel about himself. And here's the strange part. You probably also know the opposite guy. Same room, same conversation, but every sentence he says is angling for a reaction. A laugh, a nod, some tiny signal that he's doing okay. You can feel the difference in about 4 seconds, and so can everyone else in that room. Here's what's even stranger. It's rarely about looks, money, or status. You've met broke guys who carry themselves like the room is lucky to have them, and you've met men with every material advantage who still flinch every time someone doesn't respond to a text fast enough. Whatever this quality is, it doesn't come from a resume. It comes from somewhere else entirely, and most men go their whole lives never figuring out where. Marcus Aurelius wrote something almost 2,000 years ago that explains exactly why. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. That's not a productivity quote for a coffee mug. That's a diagnosis of why some people walk through life steady and others get knocked sideways by every text message that doesn't come, every plan that falls through, every person who doesn't seem impressed enough. This isn't a video about tricking anyone. It's not about performing confidence you don't have or running some kind of psychological play on the people around you. Anyone who's tried to fake this knows it collapses within a week. The mask slips the first time something actually matters to you. This video is about something much simpler and honestly much harder. Building a life sturdy enough that you stop needing other people to hold it up for you. If that idea interests you, tell me in the comments where you're starting from right now, because a lot of us start further behind than we'd like to admit, and that's fine. I'd rather hear the honest starting point than the polished version. Here's what's coming. We're going to talk about why so many men hand their sense of self-worth over to people who never asked for that responsibility. We're going to look at what the Stoics actually meant by control what's yours, not the diluted gym bro version of it that gets thrown around online. We're going to get specific about what it actually looks like, day to day, to build a life that doesn't wobble every time someone else's opinion of you shifts. And we're going to talk honestly about the discomfort of actually doing this, because nobody sells you that part. Everyone sells you the after photo, not the part where you sit with the withdrawal symptoms of quitting a habit you didn't know you had. Stick with me, because the second half of this gets into the part most people skip. The part where you find out what actually happens after you stop needing the approval. It's not what most people expect, and it changes how you think about every relationship in your life, not just the romantic ones. Let's name the thing plainly. A lot of men are quietly exhausted, and they don't know why, because the exhaustion isn't from work or from lack of sleep. It's from running a constant background process. How am I landing right now? Did that come across well? Do they still like me? That process runs in meetings, on dates, in group chats, at family dinners. It never fully shuts off, and the cost of it isn't dramatic. It's not a crisis. It's just a slow tax on your attention, paid to an audience that mostly isn't even watching that closely. Think about how much of your day actually gets spent on this. You send a message, and instead of moving on with your morning, part of your brain stays parked on your phone, waiting. You crack a joke in a meeting and spend the next 10 seconds scanning faces instead of listening to what's said next. You leave a family gathering and spend the entire drive home replaying one comment your uncle made, trying to figure out if it meant something. None of this shows up on a to-do list. None of it looks like work. But it's exhausting in the same way carrying a bag of sand is exhausting. You don't notice the individual steps. You just notice that you're tired at the end of the day for no clear reason. Seneca put it this way: we suffer more in imagination than in reality. Most of the approval chasing isn't even reacting to real rejection. It's reacting to the fear of a version of rejection that hasn't happened yet. You send a message and refresh your phone. You make a joke and scan the room for the reaction before you've even finished the sentence. None of that is really about the other person. It's about outsourcing the verdict on your own worth to somebody else's face, and then living inside the gap between sending the signal and getting the response. Here's the part worth sitting with. Needing approval isn't a character flaw. It's not weakness, and it's not something to be ashamed of. It's just what happens by default when you don't have anything more solid to stand on. Nature doesn't tolerate a vacuum, and neither does your sense of self-worth. If your days don't have a clear shape, a purpose, a project, a set of standards that are actually yours, then of course you'll look outward for the feedback loop. Something has to fill that space. The question isn't, how do I stop caring what people think, as if that's a switch you flip by willpower alone. Plenty of men have tried to just decide to stop caring, gritted their teeth through it, and found the need for approval just showed up somewhere else instead. In a different relationship, a different group of friends, a different comment section. Suppressing the need doesn't remove it, it just relocates it. The real question is, what am I building that matters enough to me that other people's opinions become secondary? Not because I've suppressed them, but because I'm genuinely occupied with something better. That distinction matters more than almost anything else in this video. Suppression is exhausting and temporary. Genuine occupation is sustainable, because you're not fighting the need for approval, you're simply not generating as much of it in the first place. Consider two versions of the same man on a Tuesday evening. Version 1 has nothing particular going on. No training scheduled, no project in motion, no standard he's holding himself to that week. His phone becomes the center of his evening by default because there's a vacancy and the phone fills it. Version 2 has a project he's actually invested in, a workout he cares about finishing, a book he's partway through that he's genuinely curious about. His phone is still there, the same notifications arrive, but they're competing with something instead of filling an empty room. That's the entire difference. Not willpower. Not discipline in the abstract. Just, is there something else occupying the space where the need for approval would otherwise sit? It's worth noticing how early this pattern usually starts. A lot of men trace it back to childhood without even meaning to. Some environment where love or attention felt conditional on performance, where being good enough, impressive enough, easy enough to deal with seemed to determine whether you got noticed at all. That's not a diagnosis, and it's not an excuse either. It's just useful context. The habit of scanning for approval usually wasn't invented in adulthood. It was inherited from somewhere, practiced for years before you were even choosing it consciously, which is exactly why it doesn't disappear just because you decide one day that you'd rather not do it anymore. Second twist here. The people who seem most naturally unbothered by what others think usually didn't get there by trying to seem unbothered. They got there by accident, as a side effect of being absorbed in something else. And that changes everything about how you actually build this, which is exactly what we're getting into next. So if performing indifference doesn't work, and it doesn't, people can tell the difference between calm and cold within seconds. Then what does? Start here. Pick one thing that's actually yours. Not something you're doing to impress anyone, not something calibrated for how it looks from the outside, not something you chose because it photographs well. A skill you're building, a body you're training. A business, a craft, a discipline you're getting slowly better at whether or not anyone's watching. This part matters more than it sounds like it should. If the thing you pick is secretly still about being seen, if you're only training because you want people to notice, only building the business because you want to look successful, the approval seeking just migrates into the new activity instead of disappearing. The test is simple. Would you keep doing this exact thing at the exact same intensity if nobody ever found out about it? If the honest answer is no, that's not the thing yet. Keep looking. Epictetus drew a hard line between what's in your control and what isn't. Your effort, your choices, your standards. Yours. Other people's opinions, their moods, whether they text back. Not yours, never was. Most of the daily anxiety in modern life comes from putting energy into the second category and neglecting the first. It's an odd kind of self-sabotage when you say it out loud. Spending most of your emotional energy on the one category of things you have zero actual leverage over while neglecting the one category you have complete control over. But it happens constantly because the uncontrollable category is louder. It pings you. It shows up as a notification. The controllable category. Your effort, your standards, your discipline, never demands your attention the way a notification does. It just sits there quietly, waiting for you to show up to it on your own. Here's a concrete version of this. If your calendar is built entirely around being available whenever someone else might want you, always reachable, always flexible, no real structure of your own, you'll feel like your life has no weight to it, because it doesn't. It's shaped entirely by other people's schedules. You become a kind of empty room that other people's plans move through. Compare that to a week where your training, your work, your actual commitments come first, and other people get folded into that structure when it fits. That's not about being unavailable to punish anyone, and it's not a strategy to seem busy and mysterious. It's that a life with real shape to it feels different to live from the inside, regardless of who's watching. And because it feels different from the inside, it also reads different from the outside. Not because you're trying to send a signal, but because it's just true. The way a house with a foundation feels different to stand in than one without. Second piece, stop asking people to referee your decisions. Not out of pride, out of practicality. If you make a choice and then spend the next 3 days checking whether people approved of it, you've handed the decision back to them after already making it. You did the hard part. You decided. And then you undid the benefit of deciding by needing a stamp of approval on top of it. Seneca again. It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. A huge amount of that waste is relitigating decisions in your head, hunting for a verdict that was never going to arrive in a form that satisfies you anyway, because the verdict you're actually looking for, total certainty that you did the right thing, doesn't exist for anyone, no matter how much approval they collect. Third, and this one's uncomfortable, get honest about the relationships and situations that are draining you precisely because you keep hoping for a different outcome than the one actually in front of you. This isn't about cutting people off dramatically or performing some big, clean break for the sake of a good story. It's about noticing when you're staying somewhere purely because leaving would mean admitting it isn't working, and asking yourself honestly whether that's a good reason to stay. Sometimes the honest answer is that it's still worth staying. That's fine too. The point isn't the specific decision. The point is making the decision with clear eyes instead of out of a fear of admitting something to yourself. There's a fourth piece worth adding here, because it's easy to overlook. Give yourself permission to be genuinely bad at something for a while. Most approval-seeking behavior is actually a fear of being seen struggling. If your sense of worth depends on always looking competent, you'll avoid anything you're not already good at, which quietly shrinks your life over time. The men who eventually build real, unshakable ground under themselves are almost always the ones who got comfortable being a beginner in public at some point. A beginner at a sport, a beginner at a craft, a beginner at running a business that failed twice before it worked. That discomfort, tolerated on purpose, does more to build genuine self-respect than any amount of looking impressive from day one. Here's the part that surprises most people once they actually try this. It's not what you'd expect, and it comes right after we talk about what happens to your relationships once you stop running on empty. Here's the twist. People assume that once you stop needing approval, you become distant, harder to reach, less warm. That's backwards, and it's worth explaining why, because this is the part almost nobody talks about honestly. When you're constantly seeking approval, you can't actually be present with anyone, because part of your attention is always monitoring how you're doing. You're not fully in the conversation. You're in the conversation and narrating your own performance in it simultaneously, like a commentator sitting inside your own head giving a play-by-play of how well you're landing. That splits you. People feel that split even when they can't name it. It reads as a kind of low-grade anxiety underneath everything you say, a slight delay, a slight self-consciousness that never quite goes away even in good moments. But when your sense of worth isn't riding on the outcome of this specific conversation, something strange happens. You can actually just be there, fully, not performing calm, actually calm, because there's nothing riding on the next 5 minutes that you need this particular person to hand you. That's not indifference to the person. It's the opposite. It's the only condition under which real attention is even possible, because you're not dividing your focus between them and your own scorecard. The commentator in your head finally goes quiet, and what's left is just you, actually listening, actually responding to what's in front of you instead of managing an internal performance review. This shows up in small, almost invisible ways. You stop finishing other people's sentences because you're not waiting for your turn to say something impressive. You're actually curious what they're going to say. You stop laughing a half-second too early at jokes because you're not managing the room. You start asking questions you actually want the answer to, instead of questions designed to keep the conversation moving in a direction that makes you look good. None of this is a technique. It's just what naturally happens once the internal noise quiets down enough for you to notice the other person is actually there in front of you. If you're getting real value out of this so far, it helps a lot if you share this with someone who's stuck running that scorecard in their own head. Most people are, and most people have never had it named out loud like this. A surprising number of men have never once heard someone describe this specific kind of exhaustion, and just having it named is often the first step toward doing something about it. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." If your thoughts are constantly dyed with, "Did that land well?" that's the color you'll carry into every room, and it seeps into things you wouldn't expect. How you hold eye contact, how quickly you respond to disagreement, how much space you take up physically without meaning to shrink. If your thoughts are dyed with whatever you're actually building, your work, your standards, the person you're trying to become, that's a completely different presence to be around, and it isn't manufactured. It's just what happens when your attention is finally pointed somewhere solid instead of somewhere anxious. And here's the part that tends to catch people off guard. This doesn't just change romantic relationships. It changes friendships, family dynamics, even how you handle disagreement at work. A man who isn't secretly begging for approval in every interaction becomes someone people actually bring hard truths to because he's not going to fall apart or get defensive over feedback. That's not a small side effect. That's often the difference between a life full of surface-level relationships and a life full of relationships that can actually hold weight. I want to be direct about something because this gets twisted online constantly. None of this is a strategy for getting anything from anyone. The moment it becomes a tactic, the moment you're doing it in order to be more attractive, more impressive, more magnetic to a specific person, you've smuggled the approval-seeking right back in through the side door. Now you're performing indifference in order to be validated for your indifference, which is just approval-seeking wearing a disguise. People can tell. It's genuinely one of the easier things to spot in another person because performed calm has a texture to it. Slightly too smooth, slightly too aware of itself, slightly too interested in whether the performance is landing. You've probably met this version of the trap already without naming it. The guy who reads a few things about not chasing and starts deliberately taking longer to text back, not because he's actually busy, but because he read that taking longer to text back is what confident men do. That's not confidence. That's a new performance layered on top of the old anxiety, and it usually collapses the first time something actually matters to him. The delayed text stops being strategic and starts being genuine panic the moment the stakes go up. The actual version of this only works if it isn't aimed at anyone. You build the discipline, the purpose, the standards, because a life with those things in it is simply a better life to be living, for its own sake, whether or not it changes how anyone treats you. If it happens to change how people respond to you, that's a side effect, not the point. And if you're doing it purely for the side effect, you haven't actually built anything. You've just found a new way to wait for permission, dressed up in language that sounds like independence. This also means giving up a certain kind of control. The fantasy that you can engineer exactly how someone else feels about you if you just find the right formula, the right amount of distance, the right words at the right time. You can't. Nobody can. And the men who seem to have this figured out aren't secretly running a formula behind the scenes. They've simply stopped needing the outcome to feel steady, which is a completely different thing than controlling the outcome. Epictetus said, "No great thing is created suddenly." This is one of those things built in layers, over months, through small, repeated choices. Choosing your training over rehashing a text message, choosing your actual standards over the easy compromise, choosing to sit with a little discomfort instead of chasing an instant reassurance. None of those choices look impressive in the moment. Nobody's watching when you choose to finish your workout instead of checking your phone for the 5th time in an hour. But those unremarkable, private choices are the actual material this is built from. There's no shortcut version where you skip the boring repetition and arrive at the steadiness some other way. It's worth saying plainly that this will feel bad before it feels good. The first few weeks of not chasing reassurance feel like withdrawal, because in a sense that's exactly what it is. You've been running on a certain kind of fuel for years, and cutting the supply creates a real physical discomfort. Restlessness, the urge to check your phone, a nagging feeling that something's wrong even when nothing is. That discomfort isn't a sign you're doing it wrong. It's a sign the old pattern is loosening its grip, and it always feels worse right before it starts feeling better. And here's where it lands. The last piece of this, the part that actually makes all of it worth doing, which is coming right now. Here's the honest version of where this leads. You're not building this so you become unreachable or so you win some invisible game against the people in your life. You're building it so you can show up to relationships. Romantic, family, friendships, all of it. As someone who's already whole, instead of someone quietly hoping the other person will complete something that's missing. Those are two completely different foundations for a relationship, and only one of them holds weight over time. A relationship between two people who are each already steady on their own is just a fundamentally different thing than a relationship where one person is trying to fill an emptiness through the other. The first kind can hold real closeness, real vulnerability, real generosity, because nobody's terrified of losing their footing if the other person has a bad day, says the wrong thing, or needs space for a while. The second kind is fragile, no matter how it's dressed up, because it was built on need rather than choice, and need has a way of curdling into resentment the moment it isn't fully met, which it never fully is, because no other person can actually fill a hole that was never theirs to fill in the first place. There's a version of this that applies just as much to friendships and family as it does to romance. And it's worth spelling out because people tend to only think about this in a dating context. A friendship where you're constantly managing how you're perceived is tiring for the same reasons a date is tiring. A relationship with a parent where you're still performing for approval decades later carries the same weight. Building this steadiness doesn't just change one category of your life. It changes the texture of every relationship you're in because the underlying pattern, outsourcing your sense of worth, was never limited to one type of person to begin with. So if you take one thing from this video, let it be this. The goal was never to stop caring about people. It was never to become cold or strategic or unreachable. The goal is to stop needing their approval as fuel, so that whatever warmth, attention, and care you offer them is actually a gift, freely given, rather than a transaction you're running to get something back. That's a harder thing to build than a tactic. It takes actual time, actual discipline, actual honesty with yourself about where you've been outsourcing your worth, and a willingness to sit through the discomfort of building something slowly instead of chasing the instant relief of a quick reassurance. But it's the only version of this that holds up under real pressure, and it's the only version that leaves you, and the people around you, better off at the end of it. Marcus Aurelius spent his whole reign as one of the most powerful men on earth writing private notes to himself about exactly this, that the only real strength is the kind you build inward, because everything outward can be taken from you or withheld from you at any time. Status, attention, other people's opinions, all of it. Build the part that can't be taken. That part is the only ground that actually holds. If this was useful, subscribe. I'm going to keep making videos that take this stuff seriously instead of turning it into a trick. Tell me in the comments which part hit hardest, because I read every single one and it genuinely shapes what I make next. Stay steady, and I'll see you in the next one.